So good morning, Doc. Good morning, everyone. So my topic for today is the application of the formal language and the social center for English language learners. Imagine you're going on a trip to Europe, maybe to see the Eiffel Tower in France or eat some pasta in Italy. Or maybe you're moving to Spain for a new job. Would you enroll in a class to learn the language? Or would you try to learn by observing and interacting with the environment and people around you? If you choose to take a class, you would be engaging in formal language learning. While if you choose to learn by doing, you would be engaging in informal language learning. Let's talk about the formal language learning. Students who don't speak English as their first language are referred to as English language learners, or the what we call ELL students. Not being able to communicate or understand English can hinder their learning. Educators or ELL students have a primary goal to provide instruction in English, so they can become proficient English learners. But how can they do this? So one way to provide formal education are include an established, consistent schedule of ELL classroom instruction. So, dapat, kung may mga students tayo or given na sa mga students natin, since kaka-start lang ulit ng face-to-face classes and they are in 2 years modular distance learning, so kung ma-observe natin sa ating mga students na medyo nangangapa sila from now sa mga lessons na tinuturo natin, especially in English. Kapag nag-set ka ng rules sa ating English teacher na English only, so more on may mga students talaga na, say for example, from our experience na umiiyak talaga kapag sasagot or hindi talaga makasagot sa isang klase. So next, we should have specific goals and objectives for learning set by the teachers, of course, and our objectives and goals should be measurable. And we have time spent outside the classroom with an ELL students or English language learners. So English teachers might also support the students in the classroom or help the classroom teacher modify instructions to accommodate the ELL students. So say for example sa ating klase, when some students didn't understand what we are talking to them or when we ask questions to them, so, ang ginagawa natin, nire-rephrase natin or pinaparaphrase natin yung questions so para maintindihan ng mga bata. So, next, let's provide informal language. So, when we say formal, it's of course, it is being done with formal instruction, formal settings, and normally in classroom. However, when we say informal language learning, it is being done sometimes at home, or in other places. So English language students often receive structured support in school where they can learn how to speak, write, read and write in English. But they also learn from other sources like friends, media such as TV, hearing conversations in public, or other informal opportunities. Learning informally is not structured like we saw with formal learning. There aren't specific goals, objectives, and structures. So when we say informal language, hindi lang natututunan ng mga bata yung language sa school. They can also learn how to speak the specific language through their friends, media. Of course, lalo ngayon, yung mga bata is very fond ng panonood ng YouTube. And kung mapapansin natin, yung accent nila is mas magaling paminsan sa atin. So that is because of media, social media. So from then, kakapanood nila ng TV, na-adapt nila yung way kung paano magsalita yung character na pinapanood nila. Informal language learning is more relaxed and focused on the students experiencing the language in its context. But that doesn't necessarily mean it happens outside the classroom. When English language learner students are in the mainstream classroom, they are also learning informally, often by inferring what words mean by their context. For instance, a child might understand the phrase "clap your hands" when they see other students clapping their hands in response to the command. So, madalas makikita natin yan when the students or say for example, meron tayong IP na mga bata. How social influences shape the English language. Let's talk about language, a social construct. Imagine that from the time you were a little baby, you were alone on a desert island. Now, there would be some difficulties with the logistic of this scenario, since you would probably die if you could not feed yourself and were all alone. But setting those problems aside, what would be the role of language in your life? Would you need language if you had no one to talk to? Language is useful to us because we live in a social world and we interact with people or other people around us. Language developed because people had to figure out how to communicate with other people. It helps us know where we belong and who does not belong, distinguishing one group from another. There is a story from the Bible that illustrates this point. Two warring tribes pronounced the word shibboleth differently so they could use it as a password and they could tell if the person was in their group or in the warring tribe. So sa given example natin, may dalawang tribo na magkaaway na magkaiba ang pronunciation sa word na shibboleth. So from there, gagamitin nila yun as a password. Kapag mali yung pronunciation mo ng word na yun, ibig sabihin hindi ka belong sa kanilang grupo. Let's take a closer look at some of the ways that our social influences impact the language we use. First one, we have the babbling. So have you ever listened to the sounds that a baby makes? To adults, it may seem like all babies make the same kind of sounds, but it is not actually the case. So for example, when the baby was born or yung bagong panganak na baby, so normally yung reaction ng mga baby is umiiyak. So sa ibang tao, pare-pareho lang daw yung tunog ng baby, but actually hindi daw. So babies spend all day listening to their parents and other adults talk to them in a particular language kapag nilalaro natin yung baby. The language interaction that babies receive from their parents and caregivers is the input necessary to activate the what we call universal grammar. The linguistic theory was proposed by Noam Chomsky, a noted linguist during the 1950s and 60s, who said that every child has a natural ability to pick up language with a normal, nurturing environment. Without this necessary stimuli, an isolated baby will suffer from what we call poverty of stimuli, and language development will become stunted. This is particularly true with children who have been neglected and given very little stimuli during the first 3 years of their life. So that's why may mga na-experience tayo na although may mga iba't ibang development ang baby at hindi sila pare-pareho ng progress. But there are certain points na meron talagang late yung progress or late bloomers na baby and sabi nila there's something connection with the environment. So kaya daw dapat pag kinakausap natin yung mga baby natin or yung mga babies ninyo, kailangan ay diretso yung salita na sasabihin nyo. Say for example, inom. Hindi mo sasabihin mamam or kung other word na ginagamit ninyo. So linguists have found out that after several months, babies start to recognize the particular sounds on their own language. These sounds are called phonemes, and not every language has the same phonemes. For example, in English, we have the TH sound that is absent in many other languages. Babbling babies of a certain age start to babble only in phonemes of their own language, and it is all because of the social influence of those adults talking around them. So when learning a second language, students must be able to understand the different styles of language needed in various situations. So let's take a look about language varieties. As English language learners begin to gain confidence in their English speaking abilities, it becomes increasingly important to teach them the differences between social and formal language. Initially, when students learn English in the classroom, they will try to speak as formally as possible for absolute correctness. But as students become more comfortable, they often tend to relax some elements of grammar and pronunciation, especially in social settings. This is not necessarily a bad thing, as the ability to speak in social manner can help students relate to their peers and develop friendship. Of course, kapag sa loob ng classroom, normally ang tinuturo natin sa bata is the formal language or how to speak formally with the correct usage of grammar and pronunciation. But in other side, maganda din na yung mga bata is natututo how to speak in social settings. Say for example, sa mga kaedad nila, say for example, ang tinuturoan natin is grade 7, kung mapapansin mo, mas madaling makipag-communicate sa part nila kapag ang gamit nilang language or kapag may inuumit silang grammar rules, mas nakaka-develop sila ng friendship sa kanilang kaklase. You'll want to consider how sharply to define and enforce social informal language based on the age and level of your learners. For instance, elementary school students may absorb information better through examples and practice, while high school learners will likely benefit from more rigid definitions, rules, and demonstrations. Ideally, you'll want your English language learners to know when each type of language is appropriate to use and how to seamlessly switch between the two. So now let's talk about formal language. Formal language is most often associated with academic discourse. As an English language teacher, it's important to model formal English when delivering information to students because English language learners have a tendency to copy the pronunciation and word of choice of the teacher. English language will typically encounter formal language in lectures, interviews, assessment, and presentation. Kaya nga sabi nila, powerful daw yung teacher because kung ano yung sinasabi natin, na-adapt yun ng bata. The way we pronounce the words, the way we communicate to them, na-adapt nila yan. So if we communicate to them fluently using the English language, may chance na ma-adapt din nila yon. And when we pronounce words correctly, of course, yun yung gagayahin ng bata. That's why, kapag nagkamali tayo ng pronounce, so mali din yung matututunan ng mga bata. It's vital to provide students with a solid basis for comprehending and using formal language. As the teacher, you are their first resource and model of formal language delivery. Some students may want to rely on textbooks and other resources to develop their language skills, but there is no substitute for hearing English spoken properly from a native English speaker. That's why sabi ko nga po earlier, so the way we pronounce words, the way we teach English language to our students, yun yung na-adapt nila, yun yung natatandaan nila. That's why kung ang natutunan nila during their elementary days is the wrong pronunciation, say for example, for the word dress. So kung mali yung pronunciation sa word na dress, so mali din yung matututunan nila up until their high school kung walang magko-correct. So the primary difference between social and formal language is that social is more concerned with creating a connection between communicators in everyday conversation. From the word itself, social, socialize, socialization sa mga taong nakapaligid sa atin. Social language places less stress on grammatical accuracy and tends to rely on conveying information that the receiver will relate to. For instance, think the ways in which teens speak to each other versus how they speak to a parent or authority figure. So, say for example, i-observe natin yun sa paligid natin ngayon. So, yung mga bata, prone ngayon sila sa kung ano yung napapanood nila. Say for example, natututunan nila yung mga word na for the stress ang person. So, pansinin natin yung way ng pakikipag-usap nila sa kanilang kaklase and the way they speak to their parents or other authorities, say for example sa teacher. So there's a difference between dun sa degree ng language na ginagamit nila. More on social language yung ginagamit nila when they talk to their friends, to their classmates, while when they are talking to the authority people like principal, teachers, they are using the formal language. Because of the cultural background of English social language, it may appear that English language learners are at a disadvantage. However, communicating in a relaxed environment that doesn't require the students to be overly concerned with accuracy, that removes penalties or criticism for mistakes, can actually help the students progress more quickly. That's why when we are teaching our students, when they pronounce the word incorrectly or pag hindi nila na-pronounce yung isang word ng tama, huwag nating tawanan yung ating students. Bagkos, i-correct natin in a right way yung ating students para hindi sila mapahiya, because kapag napahiya yung mga bata, natitrigger silang sumagot sa ating klase. So the more an English language learners comes to understand English, the better equipped that students will be able to speak in a natural, flowing manner, no matter whether the settings is formal or social. So, kapag yung mga bata natin, they learn how to use English language appropriately, so mas tataas yung confidence nila, mas magiging tataas yung kanilang self-esteem kapag sila ay humarap sa ibang examples and exercises explaining the differences between social and formal language to your English language learners can be accomplished through specific illustration. A good place to start with an example of formal and social pronunciation. For instance, formal language includes things like want to, need to, and going to. While in social language, it includes informal words like wanna, need a, gonna. So may mga inuumit sila na letters as students to give you other example of formal and social words or phrases that have the same meaning but different pronunciation. So yung mga students natin ngayon, marami silang alam na ganyan. Say for example, I wanna cry, I'm gonna go home. So inuumit nila yung ibang letters. So that's their way ng pakikipag-usap, especially to their classmates, kasi feeling nila mas madali silang naiintindihan ng mga kaklase nila than kapag ang ginamit nila ay formal language. But of course, mahalagang ituro natin sa mga bata ang kahalagahan ng paggamit ng formal language. So that's all for today. Thank you for listening.